Greetings, loves. It is I, Tactical Girlfriend. Welcome back to the channel. I hope everybody's doing well. So today I'm going to be discussing a topic that is not very glamorous, it's also very heavy, and it's also not very often talked about in the firearms community. That being said, I do think it is easily one of the most important topics when it comes to firearms, and that's suicide prevention. Suicide is an enormous problem across the world. It takes many lives every single day, especially in the US. This disproportionately affects young people, marginalized people, and actually firearm-related suicides themselves disproportionately affect men over women. What we also know is about 2/3 of all firearm-related deaths are self-inflicted. Take a second to think about that. Every single firearm that does kill somebody, that could be used on literally anybody, by anybody, is actually used by the user on themselves 2/3 of the time. That is a very grave statistic. Also acknowledging that half the adults in the US know somebody who has taken their own life by suicide implicates firearms as a much heavier responsibility than I think most people give it credit. That being said, we can be smarter and better about this. We just need to talk about these issues more. We arm ourselves to theoretically oftentimes protect ourselves, but what are we doing if these are actually going to be used against us by our own selves? We need to account for this. We need to be realistic here, and if we want to reduce firearm-related deaths, then it absolutely starts right here. This all starts with awareness and education, and that's why I'm talking about it here. I'm by no means a professional. I'm not a medical mental health expert by any means. I'm simply a gun owner who is concerned about this issue, and you should be too. We need to be proactive in having these conversations in our communities, with our friends, with our loved ones, and with our family. I encourage everybody to bring this subject up as often as they possibly can because we can't talk about it enough. As firearm owners, we need to empower ourselves by giving ourselves the tools and the plans and the ideas and concepts at hand to be able to handle such situations before they ever arise, both with yourself and with other people that you care about. There is no use in being reactive to suicide. That just gets people killed, but what does save lives is being proactive, so keep that in mind. As the saying goes, it takes a village to raise a child, and the same goes for suicide prevention. Social alienation and isolation absolutely kills. Reach out to your friends, your family, your loved ones, your coworkers. Try to keep in touch with people, check in with people. Be in regular social contact, not only for them, but for your own sake. This goes both ways. We all need to be doing this for each other. Now, if you're looking from the outside in and you're dealing with somebody who's going through a suicidal crisis, there's a few things that you need to keep in mind. First of all, they oftentimes tend not to talk about it or try to alarm people around them too much. They, if anything, are usually very quiet about it, if they say anything at all. Also, they tend to be in a mindset that is fairly fatalistic. They generally aren't going to feel this way every day, but they can tend to spiral in this case, and it'll cause them to make decisions that they normally otherwise wouldn't make. It's really important to open up a space where people feel respected, comfortable, and probably private. You want to make sure that you're there for them, that you're focused with them, that they don't feel constrained with what they can say, and that they can speak candidly, which can help de-escalate an otherwise very dangerous situation. It's important to remember that when people are dealing with these things, they're oftentimes just being crushed by despair and hopelessness, by a number of factors that have just become too much to bear with their normal coping mechanisms. Try to be patient with them, try to be very understanding and sympathetic. Take everything that they say very seriously. Even if they try to play it off or say that they're just simply using hyperbole, I would take everything that they say very literally and very, very seriously. Also, definitely try to be there for them. Obviously, you should be there for anybody that you care about as much as you can, but also after the fact too, try to follow up with them. It's absolutely crucial here to be a really good listener. Show that you care, show that you're sympathetic. Don't interject, don't interrupt, don't offer unsolicited, quick advice. That stuff usually just makes things even worse. Even if you have a burning desire to do so, you just need to give them space to process with you and for you to be sympathetic and show that you care. Ask them follow-up questions, engage with them, but don't talk over them. Also, if you can, it might be wise to try to get outside advice and outside help here, only with their consent. If you do not have their consent, I do not suggest doing this, as this can make things a lot worse. It's also really important to know that most suicidal crises are really brief. A near majority of people end up trying to take their lives within 10 minutes of deciding to do so. So as we can see here, it's really important to just try to buy time, to slow that process down, and prevent somebody from making a decision that they otherwise would normally regret. We really need to acknowledge that anybody can be at risk for suicidal thoughts at any given time. Some people experience them more often than others, but regardless, most people do experience them at some point in their lives. This means that we really need to anticipate this. We need to have a plan in place before we ever cross that bridge. Carefully assess your own history and your risk for suicidal thoughts, especially if you're a firearm owner. If you are a firearm owner, consider whether you're actually supposed to keep owning firearms for your own good. You may own a firearm to defend your own self, but what's the point if you take your own life with it? That defeats the entire purpose here. So just keep this in mind. I've had many friends who actually had to give up their own firearms because they were just too much of a liability for them. If you're feeling like you're suicidal fairly often, you really may want to reconsider your ownership of a firearm. That's not to say that you can't pick one up later down the line or do it in a safer manner, but these are just real things that you need to consider. And with that said, there is absolutely no shame in asking for help. You're not any lesser for it. We all struggle. We all need to care about each other. Make sure that before you cross any of these bridges that you have a plan in place. Have some designated friends, family, loved ones, anyone who might care about you, and talk to them about these things. Try to figure out strategies that work for you that might be able to be employed in a situation where you might be in a crisis. It's also really important to understand that substance abuse can increase the chances of suicide. That's not to say that mind-altering substances make you suicidal, but if you are already in a suicidal crisis, these can cause you to make very rash decisions that you normally wouldn't make. So if you are feeling suicidal, it's really important to understand the risks and try to cut back on those as much as you can. I also really think that everybody out there can benefit from having a therapist. No matter how stable your life is and how good you generally feel, we all got problems. It's good to have somebody to talk to. If you got nobody else, that's even more important. But regardless, a therapist is a trained specialist. You can talk through these issues, especially when it comes to things like suicide. They're very, very helpful in that regard. That being said, you need to carefully consider how you talk about suicide with therapists as a firearm owner. In certain jurisdictions, therapists can red flag you. They can use at-risk laws and get law enforcement involved if they know that you are suicidal and that you own firearms. So just carefully strategize how you want to talk to your therapist about that. Along those lines, local law enforcement may be able to conduct in certain jurisdictions wellness checks. This is when they're informed that you are at risk immediately for suicide and they try to get involved. That being said, it oftentimes doesn't help and can do more harm than good. It's all the more reason why you need to have a plan in place ahead of time to be a bit more self-sufficient and find people who actually care about you and know you to be able to assist you in a time of crisis. When it comes to mitigating the risks of you being a liability to yourself, time and distance are going to be the number one things that help you here. First of all, if you want to hand off a whole firearm to somebody, you can actually leave it with a relative without doing an FFL transfer, so long as they are not prohibited by law from owning or possessing a firearm. You also can do an FFL transfer with anybody who is legally allowed to own or possess a firearm. Beyond that, certain gun stores do actually allow you to temporarily store firearms at their locations, so you may want to look into that. You can actually hand off certain crucial parts of a firearm to somebody who might want to hold on to them until you're not feeling like you're at risk to yourself anymore. You don't want to hand off necessarily the entire gun in the cases where you just don't want to do a transfer and it's not a family member, but there are usually some crucial parts of a firearm that you can legally hand off without getting the law involved at all. Things like slides, like firing pins, like bolts, and like barrels can all simply be taken out of your firearm and held on to for some indefinite amount of time until you feel ready that you're actually safe to own those again. Beyond that, I would say maybe don't hand off things like magazines because you can still insert a cartridge into your chamber without one, and also ammo because it's very easy to reacquire. It's also really pertinent here to have a plan, to have somebody help you disassemble your firearm and understand how to do it on their own if need be. If you do feel particularly at risk for suicidal ideation, it might be really wise to keep your firearms disassembled normally and store your ammo separately. Also, generally recommend keeping them locked up, both the ammo and the firearm, and that way, if you do need to, you can simply hand off the keys to somebody else to care for them until you're feeling ready. Those are just a few concepts and thoughts that I have on firearm suicide prevention. This is an ongoing conversation that we all need to be having and developing more and more tools for us to have at our disposal. As firearm owners, we oftentimes are owning them to simply protect ourselves, but we need to be also protecting ourselves from ourselves. This is a reality. It's something that we need to acknowledge, and we need to move forward with it. Look after each other and understand that the smallest bit of effort here can make the biggest difference in saving a life. I also really want to highlight a really useful resource when it comes to these matters, and that's preventfirearmsuicide.efsgv.org. I also want to give a huge shout out to all my Patreon supporters. You make this entire presentation possible. We need to be having more of these conversations, and I want to be seeing more people doing this. And that being said, if you do want to help contribute to this particular project, you can go to patreon.com/tacticalgf. You can see the end of the video for the names of my biggest contributors. Well, that's all I got for you today. I really appreciate you all tuning in. Please be good to each other out there. And as always, please take care. Bye!